Good evening, good morning, good day, everyone. Welcome to the Cluster API Provider AWS office hours on Monday, the 16th of October, 2023. We abide by the CNCF Code of Conduct, which basically means be nice to each other. If we use the raise hand features in Zoom, so if you'd like to talk during the meeting, please use that, and then you'll be called upon to talk. I've shared, or I will share, the meeting notes in the chat window now. So please add your name to the list of attendees. And also, if there are any topics you would like to discuss in the meeting, please add that to the agenda as well. So normally at the beginning of the meeting, we give time for new people to unmute and say hello. I don't see anyone new today. But feel free if anyone wants to just say hello. Feel free to go ahead and just say hello. Cool. So we can start with the agenda. So the PSA is this week. So there has been a pull request open for about just under 2 weeks now to make some changes to the reviewers and maintainers of the project. So as per our contributing guidelines, they stay open for at least a week or until after the next office hours, whichever one is longer. So it's after the office hours in this case. Essentially, the changes that we are making are going to be Cameron, Nolan, and Fake being moved to reviewers. Yes, thank you. Vince is moving from Emeritus back to maintainer. Yes. And we then have a couple of other changes which are moving the other way. So Shivani, Dane, and Winnie are moving from reviewers to emeritus reviewers. So this PR will change that within the owner's file of the Kappa repo. So then when this merges, we can make changes to the various other places like the test infra to be able to review, and approve the jobs and things like that. So thank you all. It's fantastic to have more people reviewing. So yeah, we can just merge that after this call. So moving on to the agenda items. Karen, you have the first one. The floor is yours.
Sure. All right. So the first item, or the item I want to discuss, is about this pull request. But basically, the feature is letting us control the placement of AWS machines in a VPC that is outside of the cluster VPC. The cluster API sort of has like an implicit contract around a VPC. When you create a cluster, it's tied to the VPC, and all the other resources are tied to the VPC. And this would allow us to like create a machine that was chosen to be outside of the VPC. If right now, if you use the subnet filters or subnet ID selectors with a template or a machine, and you choose a subnet that's outside of the VPC, it won't succeed because there's a criteria filter that actually enforces that the VPC or the subnet be part of the VPC. I sort of had a question, like I was able to implement this and verify it all worked fine and build a cluster that had machines and multiple VPCs. And the sort of big assumption here is that the VPCs can crosstalk with each other. If you can't do that, then this is sort of pointless. But in that sort of scenario, I didn't see any sort of immediate issues other than the complications with the security groups. But I was sort of trying to understand if there was flaws or drawbacks with this sort of like architecture design. This is just something Indeed's sort of interested in and curious about. We don't really like, we're more just trying to explore and see if this is a potential solution for some of our unfortunate network topologies at Indeed. So we're curious if anyone has like done this before, had clusters with multiple VPCs, if there's going to be gotchas other than the security groups and probably the CNI configuration. And If anybody wants to tell me that this is a terrible idea, that's what I'm looking for.
I'll let others give the opportunity first. If anyone has any comments on that one.
And then if not, would pursuing this type of feature be a problem? Does anybody think? If we address the feedback in here?
Go for it, Vince.
I think I agree with this. We are just trying to um was trying to think about it a little bit more this morning. So the use case is like you might have like multiple shared VPC and you want these machines or pools like deployments or whatnot, like to kind of spread across. Is that kind of a good gist?
Yes, specifically we have some VPCs where like the network restrictions are different in different VPCs. So being able to spawn like a worker node and a few machines in one of those VPCs for specific workload, so we could still talk to the cluster, but reach out and talk across to also anything that was external in that network. That's sort of our use case, but we could solve that with other means and methods. This is just
No,
one
no, no.
solution.
I think that's a completely valid like use case. As we're wondering, like, it would be great to kind of have more of a like a built-in solution that also like does validation so that users don't necessarily shoot themselves in the foot. So kind of be explicit, like this is the shared VPC you should be in, and I do have access to that VPC. Like I can describe it, like right, because we do have describe IAM roles in that we require. And so basically, like if we do detect that a pool, so like a template or a machine itself, like when the AWS machine controller like reconciles, is saying like, hey, you have these security groups and you have these VPCs, like, or subnets, and that subnets are in the different VPCs, that we can kind of validate all the inputs. Because the last thing you might want is kind of to make sure that, or like the last thing that the user might want is like, I put all this input, but then the subnets or the security groups are not in that VPC, for example, right? It's like kind
Yeah.
of you can get into weird things. It's like as much as possible, if we can help with output and pre-validation, I think that would be great.
Yeah, and I agree. And I don't like personally, I don't really want to manage the security groups myself either. We let Kappa manage them for our clusters right now, and so having to step back and start managing them sucks. So I guess I could look at and seeing if I could tie that back into the automation and make the cluster aware of the secondary VPCs so that it could possibly manage them for users.
But aren't shared VPC like usually like a VPC that was already created and may be in a different AWS account altogether that you might not have access to? So we might need to support both the kind of like bringing your own everything and maybe like have the ability to create those security groups in the different VPC might also be useful. That's more of a surgical kind of change, I would say, like to the AWS cluster controller, maybe.
Okay.
Because everywhere we basically go and basically say s.scope.vpc, right? It's like and we just assume there's only one VPC for that cluster.
Yeah.
Which is completely fine, but I would separate these two concerns as like, okay, let's let for a second the machine itself to kind of be configured like slightly differently, and then let's let AWS cluster to handle more than one VPC. Like it would be good to have that change kind of separately.
Okay. I hear that. So if we wanted to expand the scope to having the cluster manage that sort of stuff, that would be good to have as a separate pull request.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that was the feedback I was looking for. So thanks.
Brilliant. Cool.
We can move on to your items, Richard.
Yeah, I've slightly changed the order because it'd be too much. Oh, Daniel, go for it.
Yeah, I was just curious about the the multiple VPC. I wonder, since it is, I think a kind of a big change in the assumptions. Uh, it would be nice to maybe have an idea of what the alternatives are. Like what are you doing today to let's say, like you said, right, you may have some network topology that you need to live with, maybe that you don't love, and this is one approach. What would be an alternative? Because something that comes to mind is I think we still have issues with. I mean, we just recently, right? We've had this subnet subnet issue that kind of came out of cluster class related changes, but we've also in the past have had I think subtle bugs around choosing subnets. It's a pretty complicated piece of code because there are so many different combinations, and I think this would introduce more combinations to maybe to choosing subnets, maybe in other places. So yeah, it would be nice to be able to justify the additional complexity by knowing about the alternatives and understanding if those alternatives are just just very a big burden on the user, as opposed to having Kappa support a separate VPC.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'll make sure I write down and list what alternatives I know about, and maybe there are some that other people are aware of that I'm not. So that could also be useful.
Brilliant. Cheers everyone on that one. So moving on to the next one is just more of a just letting everyone know. So the EKS tests are currently broken on main, been broken for a little while. So I am investigating those. Looks like it is just a very, very simple change to get them green again. But there is an issue if anyone's interested. I think you just, again, talking to subnets, it is in the area of the subnets. It was just trying to create the subnets incorrectly on the EKS side. So literally just hopefully a one-liner. But yeah, hopefully we need to get those green before we can do the next release. But yeah, just something to be aware of. So moving on to the next, sorry, give time for if people have any questions on that. No. Cool. Nolan, over to you.
Yeah, so this issue 4554 is about adding a secondary control plane load balancer. This is something we're looking at because by default, AWS or CAPI sends the load balancer data out to the external address, so you're basically paying an ingress cost. We are looking to add a secondary load balancer that is totally optional and is only used if defined. I'm currently working through what the changes would be for this. I want to highlight that this would only be for V2, not the classic load balancers, in terms of logic changes. So I want to go through the stack and make the functions related to that a little bit more generic. Because right now the scope, basically everywhere, the scope assumes there's one control plane load balancer. So that's going to need to be updated. Also, had a short discussion with Vince this morning on Slack, and some of the load balancer function names are really unclear. Like we have LB name and ELB name. So I'm going to try to, as part of this, at least highlight what's classic. So that's the only change I intend to make for the classic load balancers. I'm not looking to redo the logic there. Yeah, go ahead, Vince.
Yeah, just to add like a little bit more context here. It's like upstream and Cappy, known as also like involved. There is like a push to kind of make sure the endpoints for the cluster would be in potentially in a separate CRD. So eventually we'll be able to distinguish like the endpoints that a cluster has and kind of favor the path of like a private endpoint, like when we're joining nodes, for example, so that we don't go to the public load balancer, which seems like a kind of seems like a fine solution. Like I originally proposed in this issue like or my preference would be to add secondary, which I know it's like kind of like sometimes kind of smells a little, but unless we rev the API version, like we'll get into another issue if we want to do a list, for example, like for SSA once again, because the name of the load balancer is not a required field, like that would cause a lot of issues, and making it a required field would be a breaking change. So, and also most of the use cases that I saw, like they only have private and public, truthfully, rather than like having 3 or 4 or 5 load balancers, like I have not seen yet. So just to provide some context on why. Here.
It'd be good to tag this in also on. I think we've had a historic issue to support like a private load balancer endpoint, and we sort of talked about it for a while, and at the time we came to the conclusion that it sort of got wrapped up in the let's evolve the whole networking of Kappa piece. So it'd be good to make sure we, I guess, tag this issue into that as well, just so we're aware of it. It's reasonable to me. This does. Does anyone else have any? Oh, go for it, Daniel.
I'm wondering how a client chooses between the two. So for example, if I have let's say if I have a management, so yeah, like a cluster API management cluster, right, with all the controllers, and I create an AWS cluster. If I want to reach the internal load balancer, that cluster would need to be in the same VPC. So I think is that right? Okay.
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay, so in that case, it's probably safe to rely on the external load balancer. So then the internal load balancer would be primarily for workers to talk to the control plane.
Yeah, kubelet.
Okay. So if you're not a kubelet, you should probably use the external load balancer.
Probably. I'll also say this is for well, a lot of what's driving this is OpenShift supports this in our machine API setup, and I think there are customers that just simply want to avoid the outbound networking traffic, so they may opt for more things to talk with the internal load balancer than the public. In the OpenShift use case, we're not looking at a ton of management clusters going out and controlling worker clusters, but this definitely needs to support that. But I guess my approach to the problem has definitely been more scoped inside a single cluster. Having a secondary control plane for a worker cluster, I there might be use cases, but I'm not sure what they are.
Can I ask what is the difference? So if I create a cluster, I think I can create a cluster with an internal load balancer only. Is that correct? If I do that, and then all the kubelets talk to the internal load balancer, I think I can create, let's say, a load balancer service for any external traffic.
Sounds like it would work in theory.
So
I haven't tested it.
so why would I guess choose to deploy a cluster where I have two, let's say, Kappa managed load balancers, as opposed to saying, hey, you know what, I want a sort of private topology, and Kappa can manage, the load balancer like it always does. Oh, and it also happens that I do need ingress to my cluster API, to the Kubernetes API, to the control plane. Let me create a service for that, as I would sort of expose, other services running on the cluster.
That is a great question. Yeah, go ahead, Vince.
Well, so I think the use case is slightly different. This is to support specifically like control. Well, clusters that like are exposed to the public with a public load balancer, and then solve the issue of like one not having traffic like it flowing through the to the public load balancer from a private VPC network, so that also has both egress. Well, I guess you don't have egress costs, but yeah, that has egress costs that then go back to AWS. And basically we're paying them for free, which can be reduced. And then the other goal that has to be solved upstream in CAPI is once we have multiple endpoints, and we know that one is public, and so like we know the role of the endpoints, and we know this is a control plane endpoint, and we have one is public and one is private. Prefer the public load balancer when you join the nodes. So that goes into KubeADM. Say like, hey, go join to the private load balancer, not to the public one, because that traffic should not, flow through the internet at the end of the day. Like it doesn't need to. In the topology that we have today, tracing the traffic that would go right now, it would go with client certificates, whatnot, like from the worker or a control plane join will go through subnet, the public subnet first, through the NAT gateway to the internet, back onto the AWS load balancer public endpoint, and then back to the VPC network. So it just does a lot of, there's the egress from the NAT gateway as well that needs to be taken into account, which again, not needed for this purpose. But the public and private is very common because CAPI, like I can run the Bootstrap locally, and I would not have access to that VPC network. So I need those two kind of, this is the 80% use case, right? It's like if you just want private, that's fine. Like that's different kind of thing. But the 80% use case, like I would say folks would just run it on their laptop and then pivot basically.
Thanks. In that case, for the 80% use case, does Kappa need to even expose this internal load balancer? can it be kind of an implementation detail? Hey, this is where kubelets connect to, and then yeah, it's not something that the user even has to worry about. I know that doesn't address the other use case, Nolan, that you mentioned, where hey, customers also have some of their own application traffic that needs to travel over, or that they want to just contain internally. But it's just a question that I'm wondering.
You're suggesting like something like, if we know we're creating a public load balancer, always create a private one, kind of thing.
Yeah, and just knowing that we want to avoid those bandwidth costs, as opposed to having something that's like another entry in the API.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I briefly thought about it, but I thought that like we might want to give them, like, users an option instead of just blindly create a new load balancer once they upgrade Kappa, basically. Because you can always add it in, but like if we just make the decision for most users, that's kind of, I mean,
It'd be
I guess we could tell.
surprising.
Yeah. Release notes, hey, you're gonna get a new load balancer. Or we could make it a single flag opt-in that says pair this with a private one, but then there is a lot of the options on the the load balancer spec that kind of left me a little pause, because we would have to mingle with it a lot. Like, I think there was security groups and subnets and AZs, and I don't know. So when I wrote the little proposal, I was like, maybe we should just copy this one for now and figure this out later. But no, I understand your concern. It's like, why not make it transparent, basically?
And I kind of consider it opt-in at the moment. Like, you have to define that you want one. I think we could also potentially make this as something that you have to pre-provision, and then attach Kappa to it, and consume it. In our case, we could probably have the OpenShift installer make it and provide that information for us, versus having Kappa completely manage it. So basically, we define one and it's there. We don't necessarily reconcile it other than attaching nodes to it. So that is a possibility, if that's more palatable, I think, to have the management out of band other than attaching nodes to it.
I mean, as an idea, it actually sounds great, right? Users can save on bandwidth costs. I guess, I mean, relative to the cost of an additional load balancer. It's just how to make it easy for users to take advantage of it. It sounds like if it's there, and then we default to it for the use cases where the internal makes sense by default, like kubelets, and then otherwise the user can choose between the two.
Any more thoughts on that topic?
Just to recap, so what did we decide on to do on here?
So I guess my proposal that I'm kind of running with is that the user can provide a spec that defines the load balancer they're connecting to and the type and stuff, and then Kappa doesn't completely manage the lifecycle. It manages connecting nodes to it if it's defined, but it doesn't manage completely provisioning it and things like that. So I think that's my proposal, to make it opt-in, but you do have to provide maybe a little bit more information.
I don't know how that would work, but that sounds less useful than just
Okay.
creating it.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. I think if it's gonna be there, it sounds like it's if the savings are worth it, and it very well could be, for especially for larger clusters, chatty, lots of traffic from nodes to the control plane. Yeah, sounds like we could reuse all of the code that we've got for managing a load balancer.
Okay.
Useful.
Fair enough. We want to, I guess then my question is, how much control do we want to expose to users for it? Like, do we want to give them all the options, or?
Yeah, I would just leave them open, and maybe limit only to NLBs though, or not. It's like ELBv2, so that we stop creating like more and more classic load balancers, which AWS doesn't want us to anyways.
Right. So we limit it to ELBv2, and yeah, they can't grab classic, but yeah, if there's not one defined, then we just don't do anything.
Yeah.
We retain as much as possible, retain old behavior, because that's the other thing here. I don't want to make a breaking change as much as possible. So I expect that this is going to touch a lot of code, just because of how the scope is plumbed down. So yeah, I'll try to get a PR up this week and see, and let people review it and see where we want to go with it.
Sounds good. Actually, reading the other issue, when we had this discussion last time, it sort of broadly falls in with what people were requesting then. So that's good. I've linked the other two issues that are sort of in this area to your one.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. So so I think I've captured that correctly in the notes. So Kappa will manage it, the life cycle of it, and it will be limited to ELBv2 and be the secondary load balancer on the API. Yep, cool. Brilliant. That's good. Right, moving on. So the next one is about our next release. So we've had the v2.3.0 milestone out for a long time now. So a bunch of features and some bug fixes have gone into main that we ideally need to get out, because people are asking for them. So there's a lot of, well, there's 8 open. So I guess the ask from me is, can we defer some of these just to the next milestone, just so that we can get a release out? And just to give an idea, the last minor release with new features was back in July. So things like the subnet change that went in, and a few other features, we really need to get out there. So I don't know how we want to go about this. Do we want a separate planning session, or should we just go through the issues here and say we can punt this, or just say which ones are release blocking? So I think personally I think the EKS end-to-end test failing are release blocking. So open to suggestions on this, or we can do it offline async and just people can go in and comment on these. Any preference how we do this?
We can do it here.
Cool.
We have some time. There's some stuff that I would like to add though.
Yeah. No, that works. We just start from top and go down quickly. So this is allow empty AMA ID and instance type in the launch templates. We do have, okay. Yeah, because at the moment if you're using a launch template, we specifically say you have to fill in most of the details instead of, for example, looking up the images to use. Any thoughts on whether that has to go into this release? We do have an open PR. So it just needs review, rebasing, and comments resolving. Doesn't seem like a release blocker to me. So personally, I would say,
Yeah, plus one.
If we want to get a release out, maybe we can just put this back to the next one.
Yeah, and isn't it EKS feature get anyway? Or no? I forgot.
No, not anymore. No, so it's on. It was GA'd a while back, or graduated. Sorry, but yes, it's on the machine pools as well. So it's experimental. And launch templates are an option as well, so you can just not use a launch template.
Yeah, it can go later, probably.
Yeah, cool. Let's do so. Brilliant. I just did the PR, didn't I? But anyway. This is an interesting one. So on the machine pools to support multiple instance types, currently it's just a single instance type, essentially allowing you to create different instances. So we have a closed PR on this. Yeah, I remember this. It just got randomly closed, I think. If you go all the way to the bottom, there was a lot of comments on it. Yeah, so I think maybe we need to find out why it was closed. I'll speak to Arjun. The fact that he actually closed it, I would say, means we could push that back to the next milestone, or even back to the backlog until it's reopened.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. Cool. I will keep that one open and I'll message him and then remove that. Also did the ability to specify AZs when you're creating the VM. So Goge actually has a PR open to this that he's actively working on. So I think it is just needing reviews on that. So at the moment, the VPC will be created in all of the AZs, and this has like 5 of them, and then you can limit the number, but it will still just put it in all 3. Whereas this is allowing you the ability to explicitly say which AZs to create the VPC in. So there is actually an open PR, so we could, as long as that's reviewed. There's some comments.
Yeah, I looked at this last week. It looks pretty straightforward.
Cool. So we can leave that in. We have, so this one is where some of our releases, so the binaries don't work on Alpine. So this is basically just changing our release process. So it is not, so building of the actual binaries is not dependent on who's actually doing it. Again, do we need that right in for this release? I would say we can do that later. It's going to be a little bit of work, so unless someone can pick it up. Well, Daniel, I think you were on, if you were speaking then. Yeah, cool.
Yeah, you could probably remove from the milestone. I mean,
Yeah.
I personally have no, I don't know how to fix this. So.
Yeah. Graduation of the garbage collection feature. It'd be nice, but I don't think it necessarily has to go into this release. You don't have to hold the release up for this.
I can do that if you.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, if you want to do it, that'd be good.
Yeah, I got familiar with the code. There's another PR for the EC2 cleanup. If you want to chat up briefly too.
Cool. So yeah, so you put these in the chat window, haven't you? Cool. Cameron, the machine for machines.
Yeah, it's still under review. It's sort of early in the review process right now, so I would say probably bump it from the milestone so it doesn't hold it up.
Okay.
Unless there's people that really, really want it.
Cool. Put it to 4. And externally managed control planes. So for the Kamaji people,
I had a look at this PR. I mean, personally, I wouldn't merge it yet. Also, like annotations usually are not something I would want to keep introducing.
well, yeah, I guess on that, yeah, if there are some doubts, then we can put it into the next milestone. Just give
Yeah,
that time.
let's let it bake for a little more.
Yeah, seems reasonable. Yeah, let's put that into that. And then we have just the EKS test failure. So I think on this one, just to look at the PR now. No, actually look at the PR this time. So most of the checks are passing now on this. So the E2Es are passing. So it's just, I just got to fix that AWS test failure. So I can do that. So then onto the ones, Vince, you want to add? Which
Oh yeah, so this one is if you basically have EC2 instances in the cluster that are not managed tracked by Kappa, which could happen in a number of cases. Like if you used different kind of, if you could create instances on the side, or if you lost track of the instances, that's true as well. Alongside this, I guess, Richard, while we're here, like, any thoughts on getting the Kappa own tags like as well, like in the mix, so that we don't, that if we missed any resource that we're still owning, like we clean them up instead of leaving them hanging.
Yeah, it's interesting because you'd have to check at what point in the life cycle the garbage collector runs based on the resources.
At the very end. I also had a PR that basically like added, like basically deleted everything and didn't stop for deletion if like, because there might be intradependencies. Like for security groups, we have some security groups, and then the load balancer the cloud provider can create some security groups or load balancers and use those security groups. So you have like kind of a flow of dependencies that keep going. And so I reworked the deletion, but I don't know if you saw that PR, the process a little bit to basically try to delete as much as possible and then requeue and keep requeuing until we have deleted all the resources.
Yeah, it seems reasonable, right? Yeah, so if it's right at the end of the delete of the infra clusters, then so the AWS cluster and the AWS, I guess, managed cluster, isn't it? Now.
Yep.
Yeah. So that seems reasonable, doesn't it? That we could do the Kappa tagged ones, because everything, machine pools or the machine deployment should have already cleaned those up. So that would be spurious if they're still there.
Correct. Yeah. I can do that separately though from the specific one.
Yeah, seems reasonable to me. Daniel, I know you had a lot of input on the original garbage collection implementation.
I mean, I don't know that I've come across sort of orphaned EC2 instances. I know that there are other resources that we sometimes miss. Sometimes, you know, user managed resources like IAM, profile, you know, node profiles, roles, etc. Yeah, it would be, you know, I think it would be very user friendly to have a garbage collector that can find, you know, everything associated with the cluster. Not all resources in AWS can be tagged, I think, appropriately. So that's, you know, but maybe 90% of them. But it's funny. I just haven't seen this particular just looking at this, it kind of makes me wonder: is this masking some issue in sort of in cluster, you know, in Kappa itself?
So I expanded a little bit on the use case in the primary use cases. Like, sorry, Cameron, I didn't mean to jump in.
Yeah, all I was gonna do to answer and follow up on Daniel is, I know we've never seen a cluster like lose track of EC2 instances from Kappa, but we have seen orphaned instances, and it's around like improper teardown of a cluster. So if you tore down and rebuilt a cluster with the same name, you could see instances that way. That's the only case I've ever seen it. That's all I had.
This specifically came up because OpenShift creates some machines separately, and it does tag them like with the kind of resources that we, you know, with the tags that we usually look for. So kind of supports multiple use cases, not just one. For the Kappa own tag, like I would just add it for a good measure. Basically, like if we do end up like losing resources and we know we're owning them, why not delete them? Basically, like saving the user a headache. It's like, I have to go to the EC2 UI and probably log in again and so on.
I think, yeah. I mean, as long as it's clearly documented, it's just to me, I think that it just on its face, you know, if I see, you know, a garbage collector saying, hey, you know, deleting some EC2 instances, you know, I'm going to wonder why, you know, why didn't Kappa controllers, you know, delete this successfully? The OpenShift use case, I mean, it sounds like, right, like a user that says, oh, here, you know, I'll create an EC2 instance, but it's not backed by a machine.
Correct. Yeah.
Machine resource. I mean, I get in the name of user friendliness, it's yeah, yeah, I think it sounds all right, but yeah.
Do we have metrics around when the GC operations do something?
I think there are logs, but I haven't seen metrics.
That would be
Yeah.
interesting to us.
Which create an issue.
So sorry.
No, I was just saying we definitely capture that in an issue. Go on, Daniel.
We internally, and I think this, I imagine that other other places use their own sort of so separate from Kappa or Cappy, have just a garbage collector, right, to make sure that there aren't sort of orphaned instances that are costing infrastructure that infrastructure that costs money. For us, this would be covered, let's say, by this other service that just goes through periodically and says, oh, this doesn't look like it's in use, delete it. Is that not common elsewhere?
We definitely have folks that track AWS resources, but we're a large company.
Yeah, there's always the janitor as well, isn't there? Taking Kubernetes as an example. Well, the question is, we have talked about making the various cleanup tasks of the garbage collection configurable, i.e. basically enabling and disabling them. Would this be one that you would feel more, I guess, would have to be explicitly enabled if you wanted to clean up the Kappa-owned ones, or was it okay to do it by default?
Well, maybe we can. So, like, for now, this cleans up resources that that other controllers operate and attack with the cloud provider resources. So, like, it does not really affect Kappa for this specific PR. For the added tags for Kappa, I mean, we can. At the same time, like, the more options we give, the more complicated this thing. And usually, I mean, we don't have to do it right this second. Maybe the first step would be the GC would just look at that there are orphan resources. Maybe we could publish logs and say, like, these, I'm not gonna go delete these, but like this is what I found. And these are tagged with like own tags. We can let it bake for a little, and then potentially add code, like the same code that we have today, to actually go and delete them for the Kappa owned resource. So personally, I don't see a problem. Like, if they're owned by Kappa, Kappa should delete them. If you have like clusters with the same name, the same AWS account, this would actually solve the issue of them conflicting. Because one will be deleted, so we know that. But again, we can discuss that in the next PR issue, that to add these.
Cool. Daniel, were you raising your hand?
I was just gonna say, yeah, maybe one way to motivate this is to think of the garbage collector as clean up anything that prevents like successful deletion of the cluster's infrastructure, right?
Yeah.
So if you can't delete the EC2 instances, whoever put them there, you can't delete whatever other infrastructure that Kappa owns and wants to delete, and it's just going to keep hitting, right, dependency violations or whatever else. So that could be a legitimate. It could also definitely be sort of abused. Like, yeah, I'm just going to create whatever, and I'll just rely on this garbage collector to do it or to clean it up for me. And if it fails, I'll file an issue. But then that's a legitimate motivation. Just like GC, just bulldoze whatever I need to, so I can correctly clean up the infrastructure that I'm responsible for. So.
Right, we've got literally 1 minute left. So there's so Vince, these are your two other issues. So one is the AWS machine fields to control it. Yep. So we did you'd like this in the 2.3.
But that doesn't have to be in 2.3, I don't think.
Oh, it's up to you, Cameron. I don't know if you want it there.
Before?
Let's do 2.4. I think we're still discussing it, so I don't think there's urgency here.
And the last one is this bucket.
Yeah, this is a S3 bucket. Like if you're using the feature gate, it basically creates a VPC endpoint. So you use internal traffic. It adds create VPC endpoint, delete VPC endpoint, IAM roles. I don't know how we usually handle those in terms of release notes. I mean, I'll definitely add release notes in here, but yeah, it just goes and creates that regional endpoint if we're in for S3 in the VPC. And there's an E to E as well that they got. That should be passing.
Cool. Yeah, normally when we add permissions we do a action required on the release note saying if you want to take advantage of this, you need to run the update your CloudFormation stack and give the command, just so it gets highlighted at the top.
Okay, sounds good.
But yeah, this seems reasonable to get in. Yeah, it's basically done, isn't it? So cool. I think we're out of time, so I will this last item I will move to the next meeting, which was really just, it's been 3 months. We should probably reopen the discussion around a regular release cadence. There is a discussion that we could do. We could discuss this async on that there, but cool. Any last minute topics before we call the meeting to a close? Right, cool. Well, thanks everyone. We'll see you in 2 weeks' time. Take care. Bye.